right, we're in chapter 12 and we're going to be working with radicals. And in lesson 12.1, we're going to solve and graph radical functions. All right, so on the first slide, we're going to discuss a t-chart and determining the domain and range. So a few things we need to look at here. This is our basic square root function. We're going to be multiplying, adding to these values, but this is the most simplified square root function that we're going to look at. When it refers to the t-chart, that we're going to sketch a graph of a square root function by making a t-chart, that means we find a value for x, let's say is 0, and then we sub in the 0 and we solve for y. Just like when we worked with linear equations. The domain represents the x values. So you need to know that the domain is the x values. Domain. And then the range, that's our output. Here it is. Are going to be the y's. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion of domain and range in this section. Okay, so we're going to start with a pretty simple one. You can see it's a little bit different than the one on the first slide. We're multiplying our square root of x by a -2, and we're asked to find the domain and range. So I'm going to start by making a t-chart. And we know that underneath this radical, it has to be non-negative numbers. In Algebra 1, we're not going to be dealing with anything like a -1 under the radical. So the first value we can possibly put underneath is a 0. And that's where this 0 came from. So then we say -2 times the square root of 0, and that gave me this guy. Then I subbed in a 1. -2, put in a 1. So that's my part of the domain. Then when we multiply 1 times -2, we got -2. So this is my domain, and this is the range. And so now we're looking at the direction. So we started with 0, and the numbers are getting greater. And then with my y's, it happens that I started with 0, but my values are becoming less than 0. So we would state our domain and range. The domain is all non-negative numbers, and the range is all non-positive numbers. Non-positive. Okay? 0 is neither positive nor negative. That's why we say non-negative and non-positive. And then we just plot our points to graph, and you'll have some of these in your homework assignment. And it might look something like that. These answers I got, of course, by using a calculator. We could pick values that are perfect squares. I could have picked a 4, and then I wouldn't have to use a calculator. So it's up to you. All right, so let's pause the video and give this one a try. You know, the first thing you need to do is make a t-chart. Okay, I hope you paused the video and gave this a try. So you made your t-chart, and it might have looked something like this. You needed to figure out what goes underneath the radical. So what I would do is, we know the smallest value underneath the radical that it could equal is 0. So I'm going to set whatever's underneath the radical equal to 0. So x equals -2 when I subtract 2 from both sides. So that's why I knew I'm starting off with -2. And then, of course, -2 plus 2 gives me 0. So -0 is just 0. And then we work our way from there. So once we have all our ordered pairs, we're just going to plot them. Okay, so now we're going to look at the domain and the range. It says domain is all numbers greater than or equal to -2. And the range happens to be all non-positive numbers again. It's not always going to be that, just in this instance it is. All right, I added one last example. In this example it says just give the domain. So we're going to take what's underneath the radical, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. So 3x minus 10 equals 0. If we add 10 to both sides, we get 3x equals 10 divided by 3. So x equals 3 1/3. Then we could put it into a t-chart. Okay, so if I say 3 1/3, if I put that back up into that expression, I'm going to get y equals 0. So then let's say I pick another number. Let's say I pick x is equal to 4. So 3 times 4 is 12. 12 minus 10 is 2, and the square root of 2 is approximately equal to 1.4. And then let's say I pick 5. X is equal to 5. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 minus 10 is 5, and the square root of 5 is approximately 2.2. And all it's asking for is the domain. And I'm looking at the direction of my values. So the domain is going to be x is greater than or equal to 3 1/3.